Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. I never considered myself a suspicious man, but I suppose even the steadiest hearts can be driven to paranoia when love is at stake. Our 5th anniversary had just passed, and my job as a regional sales manager meant I was often away from home, leaving my wife, Elisa, alone. She always said she understood the demands of my career, and I trusted her implicitly, or so I thought. To ease my worries about her safety while I was gone, I installed a GPS tracker in her car. It was a simple gadget, tucked away neatly, a silent guardian of sorts. Just to keep you safe, I had told her, and she'd kissed me, saying it was sweet, how much I cared. The first few trips, I checked the tracker sporadically, comforted to see her car parked at familiar spots, her office, the gym, the little cafe where we sometimes grabbed brunch on lazy Sundays. Then, one week, something changed. The little blip that represented her car began stopping at an unfamiliar address on the outskirts of town. Once, twice, then almost daily. Curiosity gnawed at me. Perhaps it was a new friend, or a client she hadn't mentioned. Yet, a nagging voice in my head whispered, "Why wouldn't she tell you about it?" Driven by a mix of concern and something darker, I decided to see for myself. I told her I had a business trip, kissed her goodbye, and left. But instead of heading to the airport, I drove to the address from the tracker. The house was quaint, ivy crawling up its old brick walls. Her car was there, parked outside. Heart thudding, I approached the door, and through the window, I saw them, Elisa and the man, laughing together with an intimacy that left no room for doubt. I felt as if the ground had been yanked from beneath me. Betrayed, foolish, all the years of trust evaporating in an instant. I returned to my car, a storm of emotions raging inside me. The image of their laughter, so carefree and so piercing, haunted me all the way home. Days passed in a blur. I said nothing, smiling through gritted teeth, kissing her goodbye each morning, all the while a sinister plan taking shape in my mind. If she could shatter our vows so easily, then I would ensure she lost everything, her reputation, her comfort, her peace. I started with the man. It wasn't hard to dig into his life, to find the cracks in his polished exterior. A few anonymous tips later, and his career began to crumble. As for Elisa, I waited. The revenge on her needed to be precise, a strike that would resonate long after the dust had settled. As the days turned into weeks, my plan grew more elaborate, more chilling. I was no longer the man I had been, betrayal had reshaped me as surely as it had rewritten our story. And as I set my plan into motion, the thrill of the hunt began to overshadow the pain, giving me a dark comfort. I would ruin her, utterly and completely. And then, I would leave, disappearing from her life as if I had never existed. This was just the beginning. My resolve hardened with each passing day, feeding off the secrecy that cloaked my double life. As Elisa remained oblivious, my plans for her unraveling took a more tangible form. Yet, even as I plotted her downfall, a part of me ached for confrontation, for the truth to erupt between us like a violent storm. It was a chilly Wednesday evening when I decided to break the silence. The setting sun cast long shadows across our living room as I sat, waiting for her to return from another mysterious afternoon at that house. The very thought twisted a knot tighter in my stomach. When Elisa finally walked in, her face lit up with a weary smile. "You're home early," she remarked, setting down her keys and leaning in for a kiss. I dodged subtly, the distance between us filled with unspoken words. "We need to talk," I said, my voice flat, eyes not quite meeting hers. Confusion flickered across her features. "Is everything okay?" "No, it's not." I stood up, pacing in front of her. "Where were you today?" Her eyebrows knit together, a slight frown forming. "I was out with Megan, catching up." "Why?" I paused, the lie so blatant that it stoked the coals of my anger. "Stop lying to me, Elisa. I know about him." The color drained from her face, her mouth opening slightly, searching for words that wouldn't come. I don't know what you're talking about. Pulling out my phone, I showed her the GPS logs, the repeated visits to the same address. Her eyes widened, realization dawning, followed by panic. "It's not what you think," she stammered, reaching out to me, but I stepped back, the gulf between us widening. "Then explain it to me. Make me understand how it's anything but what I think." Tears brimmed in her eyes, her voice breaking. "It was a mistake. I was lonely, you were always gone, and he was there. It just happened." The simplicity of her confession, the banality of her betrayal, fueled my contempt. "And that justifies it?" My voice rose, a crescendo of hurt and fury. "You destroyed us for a fling." Elisa sobbed, collapsing into the couch, her hands covering her face. "I'm so sorry, I never wanted to hurt you. Please, can we just talk about this?" But the time for talking had passed. I had seen the enemy, and it lived in the person who had once vowed to stand by me. "We're beyond talking. You'll see the consequences of your choices, Elisa. I'll make sure of it." Turning on my heel, I left her there, a crumpled figure shadowed by the fading light, her cries echoing hollowly in the empty room. As I closed the door behind me, the finality of the click was a grim satisfaction. Outside, the night had drawn its dark curtain, and I felt the chill wind like a companion, whispering of the revenge that was yet to come. This was just the escalation, a prelude to the meticulous destruction I had in store for her. As I drove away, my thoughts were clear, every emotion distilled into a cold, determined resolve. She had unleashed this storm, and I would be its harbinger. The air was crisp as I stepped out into the early morning light, a plan as cold as the dawn coursing through me. I had made calls, pulled strings, and now it was time to see the fruits of those endeavors. Today, Elisa would face the first of many consequences. I arrived at the cafe where we often had breakfast, a place laden with memories of better days. It was here, amid the clatter of dishes and the murmur of early risers, that I had decided to unveil the first act of my revenge. Elisa walked in, her face pale, her eyes wary as she spotted me at our usual table. She approached, a tentative step at a time, her hand clutching her purse like a lifeline. "I didn't think you'd want to see me," she murmured as she sat down, avoiding my gaze. "We need to talk about how things are going to go forward," I said, my voice calm, masking the turmoil inside. She nodded, looking up with a flicker of hope. "Yes, I'd like that. Maybe we can figure things out, maybe there's a way to." I cut her off with a raised hand. "Not in the way you hope. I want a divorce, Elisa. And I've made sure you'll leave with nothing." Her face crumpled, and she grasped for words. "You can't mean that. Please, we can go to counseling, we can try to." "It's too late for that," I interrupted. "I've spoken to your boss. Told him about the affair, how it's been affecting your work." A lie, perhaps, but a convincing one given her recent distracted demeanor at her job. Elisa's face went white. "You didn't." "I did. And there's more. Remember how you always wanted to keep your private life separate from your professional? Well, I ensured everyone knows. Your colleagues, your friends." I leaned back, watching the horror unfold in her eyes. "You're ruining my life," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You ruined ours first," I replied coolly. Just then, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and I could see the color drain further from her face. She showed me the screen, a message from her boss, asking her to call him as soon as possible. "Why are you doing this?" Her voice was barely a whisper, her composure breaking. "To show you the consequences of your actions. You need to feel what I felt, that utter betrayal." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This isn't you. This isn't the man I married. I'm not that man anymore. Not after what you did." Elisa turned and left, her departure swift, leaving behind a wake of whispered speculations from nearby tables. I watched her go, my heart pounding with a mix of triumph and a piercing, hollow sadness. As I sat back, the weight of my actions began to settle in. The first strike had been dealt, the first wound inflicted. But the satisfaction was fleeting, replaced by a gnawing emptiness. I realized then that revenge might not bring redemption, but there was no turning back. The path was set, and I would follow it to whatever end awaited. The relentless march of my vengeance had turned days into a blur of grim satisfaction mixed with haunting solitude. Elisa's world had unraveled thread by thread, just as ours had, and yet, the gaping hole her betrayal left within me remained unhealed, growing darker with each passing moment. Our final confrontation was inevitable, a crescendo in the tragic symphony of our collapsed marriage. I chose the stark, echoing space of the empty house we once called home for it, the house now sold under her nose, the proceeds funneled into accounts she couldn't touch, her financial ruin complete. She entered, her steps hesitant as the door creaked behind her. Her eyes, once vibrant with life, now seemed dulled, hollowed out by the cascade of losses. "You've taken everything," she said, her voice a hollow echo in the stripped-down foyer. "Are you satisfied now?" "I told you, Elisa, you would feel what I felt," I responded, my tone as cold and detached as the bare walls around us. "What about love? Did it mean so little to you?" Her voice broke, a mix of anger and despair. "Love?" I scoffed, the word bitter on my tongue. "Love doesn't live here anymore, only the remnants of betrayal." As we stood in the empty shell of our past, the air thick with the ghost of happier times, she shook her head slowly. "I made a mistake. I admitted it, I pleaded for forgiveness. How could you be so cruel?" "Cruelty was learning of your affair from a GPS tracker. Everything else was just consequences," I replied, stepping closer, my gaze unwavering. She flinched, as if the distance closing between us was a physical blow. "There's nothing left now, is there? You've destroyed us both." "That was never my intention," I said, the words tasting like ash. "But it's too late for intentions." Suddenly, her phone rang, slicing through the tension. She glanced at it, her face turning pale. "It's the hospital," she murmured, answering the call with a trembling hand. As she listened, her face contorted in pain, and the phone slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor. "What is it?" I asked, a pang of old concern flaring up. "It's my sister," she gasped, tears streaming down her face. She was in an accident. She's gone." The room seemed to tilt, the walls closing in. Her sister had been a collateral damage in my ruthless campaign, her emotional breakdown a direct result of the chaos I had unleashed in my quest for revenge. Elisa looked up at me, agony written across her face. "Was this your doing too? Her blood is on your hands." "No," I whispered, the finality of the devastation I had wrought crashing down on me. "This was never meant to happen." But her gaze hardened, any remaining trace of our love extinguished in her eyes. "You've taken everything from me, my love, my life, my sister. I will never forgive you." With that, she turned and left, her departure resolute, her sorrow a palpable shadow fleeing into the night. I stood alone amidst the ruins of our life together, the price of my vengeance finally clear. I had sought to balance the scales, to make her feel my pain, but now, we were both broken, parted forever by the hatred of betrayal, our lives irrevocably altered. As the silence of the empty house enveloped me, the tragic echo of my actions reverberated through the hollow chambers of my heart. The cost of revenge was more than I had ever intended to pay, and in my ruthless quest, I had lost not just my wife but a part of my soul.